Help me understand why we allow over 16,000 children to die each day from hunger or hunger-related diseases. Help me understand why it is acceptable for the 0.1% to control majority of global resources, while 6 million children die of starvation every year. Help me understand why we should grow up to empower corrupt banks, corrupt corporations, and corrupt governments instead of empowering humanity. Please explain to me why we should value power and profit instead of people. Help me understand why 1 billion people are living on less than $1 a day, and of that 1 billion, 162 million people are living on less than 50 cents a day. It is unreasonable to believe that poverty occurs naturally. It is unreasonable to believe that people wake up and say, "Today I want to work hard," at not being able to eat. To quote Nelson Mandela, poverty is not an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, it is man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings. So if poverty is not an accident, then what is causing this pandemic we call poverty? It is the point of this speech to argue that a corrupt and violent group of people, through the use of governments, banks, and corporations, are causing the poverty we are seeing in our world. Allow me to explain how globalized banking is causing poverty, why this should matter to us, and how we can change it. What most of us understand is that extreme poverty occurs when people are not able to procure their basic needs, such as water, food, sanitation, clothing, healthcare, and education. What most of us do not understand is that the reason this type of extreme poverty exists on a global scale is due to the corruption of individuals in our banks, governments, and corporations. How do banks fit into the corruption? They are the credit creators. Nations access this credit, which creates the debt money that will be owed back to the bank. Attached to this debt money is compounded interest. This interest can never be repaid because the only ones allowed to create money is the banks. As a result, an exponentially growing national debt is created in every nation that borrows from these banks. How do governments fit into the corruption? They are the policymakers and the tax collectors. The corrupt politicians create policies that benefit the corrupt banks and corporations. These same politicians create taxation policies that lead to wealth redistribution from the poor to the wealthy bankers. Because the tax laws benefit the corrupt banks and corporations, the people who can least afford to be taxed carry majority of the burden. So how do corporations fit into the banking scam? Organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, and the WTO convince countries who are resource wealthy to participate in their centralized banking scam. Government leaders who will not support the banks are forced out and new leaders are put in. These leaders are paid to participate to the detriment of their country. These countries are then destroyed through the looting of their resources, the enslavement of the people, and the denial of benefiting from the profits derived from their own country's resources. Why should this matter to us? It matters because if you and I were in a state of extreme poverty, we would want someone to save us from those imposing their corrupted will upon us. It matters because if we turn our eyes from the injustice, then we will have no excuse when injustice is thrust upon us. It matters because if we don't stop the corruption, my generation will most probably be slaves to the corrupt. How can we change our present course? One option is that every nation creates its own bank owned by the people and quickly phase out the banks that are subject to the policies of the BIS. Second, close down the entire global centralized banking scam. Then make these corrupt criminals associated with these organizations accountable for what they have done. Third, each nation begins to create its own money supply to help create schools, hospitals, farms, and any other infrastructure needs. Any and all profit will go to the people and not private global corporations. In conclusion, we could begin to remedy the issue of poverty as well as other key issues such as the environment, energy, health, and education simply by stopping these corrupt individuals and groups. Albert Einstein once said, "The world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking." So let us change our thinking on governments, banks, and corporations so we can eradicate extreme poverty. Thank you.
It was about 5 or 6 weeks ago that Victoria spoke to a group of 600 people at a Rotary Club, and she's going to be giving the same speech to us today. And I saw it, I think a week or so after it hit the web, it started going around, and so I quickly got on the phone and talked with her dad Zane and invited them here. And so we have a very special treat. So Victoria, come on up, do your thing. Go up.
Have you ever wondered why Canada is in debt? Have you ever wondered why the government forces Canadians to pay so many taxes? Have you ever wondered why the bankers from the largest private banks are becoming wealthier and the rest of us are not? Have you ever wondered why the gross national debt is over $800 billion? Or why we are spending $160 million a day on the interest of the national debt? That's $60 billion a year. Have you ever wondered who receives the $60 billion? What I have discovered is the banks and the government have colluded to financially enslave the people of Canada. I will share with you 3 important points of reference which will hopefully spark enough interest and concern for you to continue the research on your own and to engage your government to stop this criminal act against the people of Canada. First, we will briefly examine the Bank of Canada. Second, we will see how our banking system works today. And lastly, I will offer a viable solution that we can petition our government to implement. A very little known figure in Canadian history is J.L. Gradon McGeer. He was a lawyer, Member of Parliament, and Mayor of Vancouver. His contribution to Canada is probably the greatest in our history. He championed the creation of the National Bank of Canada, whose sole purpose is to create and manage Canada's money. It was formed on July 3, 1934, and owned by all Canadians. Until the 1970s, because of the Bank of Canada, Canada's national debt was held at a constant, manageable level, until the government decided to implement what we now have as our modern-day banking system that is robbing the Canadian people. So how are they robbing us? Allow me to explain how our private banks and government work today. First, the Canadian government borrows money from the private banks. They then lend the debt-based money to Canada with compounded interest. The government then continues to increase taxation of Canadians year after year in order to pay back the interest on the exponentially growing national debt. What results is inflation, less real money for Canadians to spend into our economy, and the real money being used to pad the pockets of the banks. Also, the government gave the banks the ability to loan out money that doesn't exist in the form of loans. When a bank gives you a mortgage, which literally means a death pledge, or a loan, they don't actually give you money. They click a key on a computer and generate the fake money out of thin air. They don't actually have it in their bank vaults. Presently, the banks only have $4 billion on reserve, but they have loaned out over $1.5 trillion. To quote Graham Towers, each and every time a bank makes a loan, a new bank credit is created. New deposits, brand new money. Broadly speaking, all new money comes out of a bank in the form of loans. As loans are debt, then under the present system, all money is debt. What I find interesting is even Jesus, in Matthew 21, drove out the money changers in the temple because they were manipulating the currency to steal money from the people. The private banks are just like the money changers in Matthew 21. They are defrauding and robbing the people of Canada, thus their freedom, and they need to be stopped. How should the banking system work? In an infamous interview, Mr. McGeer asked Mr. Towers, "Can you tell me why a government with power to create money should give that power away to a private monopoly and then borrow that which Parliament can create itself back at interest to the point of national bankruptcy?" Mr. Towers replied, "If Parliament wants to change the form of operating the banking system, then certainly that is within the powers of Parliament. In other words, if the Canadian government needs money, they can borrow it directly from the Bank of Canada. The people would then pay fair taxes to repay the Bank of Canada. This tax money would in turn get injected back into our economic infrastructure and the debt would be wiped out. Canadians would again prosper with real money as the foundation of our economic structure and not debt money. Regarding the debt money owed to the private banks, such as the Royal Bank, we would simply have the Bank of Canada print the money owing, hand it over to the private banks, and then clear the debt with the Bank of Canada. And yes, we have the power and lawful right to do so." In conclusion, it has become painfully obvious, even for me, a 12-year-old Canadian, that we are being defrauded and robbed by the banking system and a complicit government. What will we do to stop this crime? What will we do to ensure that the next generation will live free and clear of the debt-based economy that enslaves them to the banks? Margaret Mead said the following, and I hope that all of you remember this. "Never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Thank you.